This is KEDT Community Focus. I'm Rob Boscamp. From Rails to Trails is a documentary that will premiere on October 15th on PBS stations and streams on pbs.org and the PBS app. The documentary focuses on famous rail trails in the country and the 60-year struggle of one of America's most unlikely grassroots movements. One of the trails featured in the documentary includes the West Rail Trail in Brownsville. I had the privilege of speaking with director and producer Dan Protess about the documentary as well as his time in Brownsville. This documentary, it's about 60 years in the making, basically, 26,000 miles of rail trails. And tell me about the journey that you went through in making this documentary.
So the documentary is based loosely on a book also called From Rails to Trails, which was written by Peter Harnick. Peter is one of the founders of the Rails to Trails Conservancy, and he approached me 3 years ago. He written this book about the history of this movement to, as you said, convert old railroad beds into trails. And I had to think about it a little bit. I've been making documentaries for 30 years now, but knew very little about this movement. I read through his book and just found a wealth of incredible stories. For people who enjoy trails, who bike on them or walk on them, they might not necessarily understand that every single mile of every single trail in America, someone had to fight hard to create. To pay for it is often a fight. To get the property to build the trail is often a fight. And there are often private property interests who are not necessarily in favor of these trails. And so people had to fight for them. And for a documentary and for TV, battles are always good drama for television. The other thing that really made me want to make this film is that I live in Chicago and I live in a neighborhood with very little green space. I'm an avid jogger. I used to jog on the streets of Chicago, which is not always safe. And then about 10 years ago, they built a trail here called the 606. It's a few blocks from my house, and it's just totally transformed my life in terms of having a safe space to jog every day. And I'm sure in Brownsville you've found the same thing with the West Rail Trail, that it just has given people green space and a way to get around town that's just comfortable, away from cars.
And on that note, this documentary does have roots in South Texas. Brownsville's West Rail Trail is featured in this documentary. So what was it like covering that particular trail?
It was awesome. So people will see that I actually ended up deciding to start the documentary in Brownsville. The first 5 or 6 minutes are there in Brownsville because it was an excellent illustration of everything that I'm trying to show in this program in terms of the battles that take place to build these rail trails and just the tactics that people in Brownsville were so passionate. I should say part of what made this a great story was that there were forces that wanted to turn that railroad corridor into an elevated toll road, and I couldn't think of anything more diametrically opposed to a trail than toll road with traffic rushing by. And so I loved that. And then I loved how the community fought to create this trail. There was a judge who didn't back the trail, so they unseated the judge. They came to the city council with a wheelbarrow full of petition signatures urging the city and the county to build this trail. It's just dramatic, wonderful stuff. Many of the stories in this documentary took place in the 1960s and 1970s. We also have the benefit of the fact that this just happened a few years ago, so the players are all around and the photos are excellent. And in terms of just capturing the story, your city really rolled out the welcome mat for us. People were just so welcoming, and we had a great few days in town there, ate some good food, and enjoyed some time out on the trail.
And the documentary also features trails in New York City, Georgia, Seattle. The Great American Rail Trail encompasses several states. Do you feel that sometimes these trails can maybe be overlooked? Those names alone, they serve millions of Americans with scenic views and healthy lifestyles and the ability to have that lifestyle choice.
Yeah, I often have to tell people when I say I made a documentary about rail trails, the first thing I have to do often is explain what a rail trail is, because not everyone knows. What I often say is like the High Line in New York, because that's a popular trail and a good point of reference for people. But if many parts of the country, obviously there's 26,000 1,000 miles of rail trails crisscrossing the country. So wherever you live in this country, you're not far away from one, but there are plenty of people who have no idea that those trails used to be railroads.
And one cool thing about this documentary as well is that it's narrated by Edward Norton. Were you part of that process at all? And if so, what was that like?
Yeah, I got to work with him 3-4 months ago. He was just so incredibly generous with his time. He's a A-list celebrity. He has no doubt better things to do with his time than to narrate our PBS documentary, but was so generous with his time because he's passionate about the cause. His father, Edward Norton Sr., is an environmental attorney who has been very active in the Rails to Trails movement. And Edward Norton Jr., he lived in New York along what became the High Line and watched that project come together and has remained very involved in that project. He agreed to help out with the film because he's a believer in the power of trails.
And viewers can look forward to what he had to say about the trail in Brownsville, so that is exciting. I guess I will close with this last question. This documentary airs on PBS and the PBS app on October 15th. What does PBS mean to you?
Oh my God. I started working for a PBS station in Wisconsin in 1994 as a college student. It means everything to me. You just look at this documentary. This is the kind of story you're not going to find on any commercial television outlet. We're not trying to sell you soap or gasoline or anything else. We're trying to tell an important American story about a social movement, and you're just not going to find that anywhere else. And it's heartbreaking what's happened to this system, but I think there's enough believers out there that will be resilient and make sure the next generation has public media. I appreciate your time and so excited to be able to feature Brownsville in the documentary. You know, there's a couple of New York stories in the documentary. When you tell New York stories, people in New York are not necessarily excited because film crews are crisscrossing that city all the time. But you go to a place like Brownsville and spotlight the important work that people are doing there, and people are thrilled to have you there and are excited that we're sharing your local story with America.
Dan, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
This has been Community Focus. Thanks again to Dan Protess, director and producer of From Rails to Trails. The documentary premieres on PBS stations on October 15th and can be streamed online on pbs.org and the PBS app.